Hello everyone there in YouTube world. My name is Joan Kenobi. Like always, I got a good one for you today. Back when I was in high school, whenever I had time after I finished my schoolwork, I would write down my own versions of the Star Trek movies. I had my own character, I kind of did my own version of it. I never really published them, I didn't do anything with them, it was just something I did in my spare time. Well, I decided to change that, and I'm going to be uploading my own fanfics of the Star Trek movies, and eventually the Star Wars movies. So, let's start with Star Trek Generations, and I'm actually going to be starting just before the events of Encounter at Farpoint. It's going to be starting just before that. So sit back and enjoy Star Trek Generations. I had done it. I had finished the academy and was heading for my first assignment. I was to be the helmsman of a starship, and not just any starship. I was to be the helmsman of the newly commissioned USS Enterprise NCC 1701D. After I got my orders, I head for the closest turbolift that would take me to a shuttle bay. As I was waiting for the lift, I noticed that someone else had come to the lift and was waiting. I turned to greet them when I noticed that it was none other than my commanding officer, Captain Jean-Luc Picard. As soon as I saw him, I snapped to attention and said, "Captain Picard." He looked at me and said, "At ease, Ensign. Where are you off to?" I relaxed and said, "The Enterprise, sir. I'm the helmsman, Ensign Jonathan Dibble." "Ah, yes. I thought it was you. Congratulations on the assignment, Ensign." "Thank you, sir. And may I say that it is an honor to serve on this ship." He simply nodded his head. By this time, the lift had arrived, and we headed for the shuttle bay. When we got there, I went over all the pre-flight checks, and we were off. On the way to the Enterprise, Captain Picard noticed the weapon I had on my belt. "What kind of weapon is that, Ensign?" "Oh, it's my lightsaber, sir. It has an energy-type blade and can deflect weapons fire." "Deflect it where?" I looked at him and said, "Allegedly, back at the person who fired it. However, I'm not very good at that yet." Then he asked me about my gloved hand. "It was an accident, sir. I was training on the holodeck with my lightsaber, sparring with another hologram that had a lightsaber. I always use a holodeck lightsaber for safety reasons. However, no one noticed that the safety protocols were malfunctioning. I went to block, and the holo character took my hand clean off. Ensign, your records show that you're not completely human." "No, sir. I have all the abilities of a human spider. I can stick to walls, shoot weapons from my hands, and have superhuman strength and reflexes. And that's why I don't just have a flesh and blood hand instead of a robotic hand." The captain looked at me a little funny. "It's a constant reminder that even though I have all these powers and abilities, in the end, I'm still human." He nodded his head like he understood. I looked at the console and noticed a shadow coming over us. Captain Picard said, "There she is, Ensign. The Enterprise." I looked up and my jaw hit the floor. She was huge. A brand new class ship called Galaxy Class. With a total of 42 decks, she could easily hold over 1,000 people, including families. We landed in the main shuttle bay and headed for the bridge. When we got there, I was amazed at how big the bridge was. Captain Picard said, "Let me introduce you to some of the other senior officers." A woman with dark curly hair came up. "This is Counselor Deanna Troi. She is half human, half Betazoid." I looked at her and said, "So you can read my mind, ma'am?" She smiled. "No, Ensign. I can only feel your emotions." I said, "Okay." Then a person came up who could not have been any paler if he tried. I realized that this was Lieutenant Commander Data, the science officer and the second officer of Android. I went up and shook his hand. "It's a pleasure, sir. I've heard a lot about you." "I've heard a lot about you as well, Ensign." Then a blonde-haired girl came up to us. "Ensign, this is Lieutenant Tashiar, our chief of security." I said, "Ma'am," and she said, "Ensign." Then she turned to Captain Picard. "Captain, sorry to bring this up, but one of my officers was unable to report to duty because of a pretty bad illness. It's not life-threatening, or anything. He is just not well enough to report duty. Now it's a very minor problem, but I'm now short-staffed. I stepped forward and said, I can help, ma'am. Then a Klingon came up and said, with all due respect, sir, I do not see how this ensign, who has had no experience being in security and does not look that strong, can be a security officer. Captain Picard turned to me and said, Ensign, this is Lieutenant Junior Grade Worf. I just smiled. Apparently Mr. Worf was not aware of what I could do. I turned to Captain Picard. Captain, request permission to give a little demonstration. He smiled because he knew that I had superhuman strength and said, permission granted. I turned to Mr. Worf and said, I challenge you to the Bahaku challenge. Now this is pretty much the Klingon version of arm wrestling. He looked at me and said that no human has won that challenge. I said, I know. He did, however, accept my challenge. After we deactivated the security console, we got into position. I asked Mr. Data to tell us when to start, and he gave the countdown. Wa, Cho, Wei. We started, and at first we were evenly matched, and that threw Worf off guard, but he recovered. Then I upped my strength, and he slowly started to lose. Then with one final push, he lost, and he was very surprised. I turned to Lieutenant Yar. Ma'am, it may not look like it, but I do have superhuman strength, and I can be a valuable asset to your team. She said she agreed. I turned to Mr. Worf. I hope I did not dishonor you, sir. He said, not at all, Ensign. I'm actually honored. With that, Captain Picard told me to take my position so we can get the rest of the senior officers. I went to the helm, and we got clearance from dock control. I cleared all moorings and put the thrusters on standby. I told Captain Picard that we were ready for departure. He gave the order. Take us out, Ensign. 1/4 impulse. Puzzled by this, I turned around and said, Sir, regulations state that ships are only to use maneuvering thrusters when leaving space dock. He smiled and said, I'm glad you were paying attention. Take us out. Full thrusters. I turned back to my console and said, full thrusters. Aye, sir. And I took us out manually. Now, why manually? Auto would be easier. Yes, auto would be easier. However, some of my best evasive maneuvers were done manually, and I wanted to get a feel for how the Enterprise handled manually. As soon as we were clear of space dock, I turned to Captain Picard. We are free and clear to navigate, sir. Take us to Farpoint, Ensign. Warp 4. Aye, sir. Warp 4. Engage. Then with the push of a button, I started an adventure that would end in disaster to save billions of lives.